In the opening segment of the story, Reginald, Reggie, Dubosi immediately pulls the reader into a world of suburban absurdity and class warfare, except instead of typical neighborhood squabbles, he finds himself at odds with the rigid, sanitized world of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. Right from the start, Reggie establishes his identity through defiant humor and an unapologetic tone, making it clear that his forthcoming tale is as much a personal rebellion as it is a satirical commentary on overly controlling neighborhood organizations. Reggie begins by proclaiming that he became public enemy number one of the Willow Creek Estates HOA even though he doesn't own a single grain of sand within their meticulously manicured borders. This opening statement is both an act of defiance and a humorous invitation to the reader. He is the disruptive outsider in a world where conformity is worshipped. The mention of being at odds with the HOA sets up the central conflict. A clash between an individual's free-spirited, unorthodox lifestyle and the oppressive uniformity enforced by the homeowners association. Central to this conflict is the figure of Brenda Higginbotham, introduced in Part 1 as the president of the HOA. Brenda is not portrayed as a typical administrator, she is depicted with a surreal, almost caricature-like quality. Her appearance, blonde buff hair that defies gravity, and her formidable sense of entitlement are highlighted, setting her up as the epitome of what Reggie sees as the arrogant, overbearing leadership that perpetuates the restrictive environment of Willow Creek Estates. Brenda's personality is not merely annoying, it's exaggerated to the point that she almost becomes a symbol of the extremist attitudes that can come to define certain bureaucratic institutions. This immediately establishes a David versus Goliath dynamic between the freewheeling Reggie and the oppressive regime represented by the HOA and its president. Reggie's introduction of his own living situation further deepens the contrast between himself and the entrenched culture of Willow Creek Estates. He lives in a modest, perfectly respectable bungalow on Elderwood Lane, an environment depicted as quiet and relatable, inhabited mostly by retirees tending to their roses and fussing over community details. In contrast, the Willow Creek Estates are painted as a bastion of bland uniformity, where large McMansions with identical three-car garages stand as monuments to mediocrity and conformity. By emphasizing his own humble abode and unpretentious lifestyle, Reggie not only underscores his outsider status but also elevates his garage, a space that houses his cherished vintage Triumph motorcycle and a collection of power tools, to the status of a personal sanctuary. His garage is not just a storage space but a symbol of his creative individuality and resistance to the homogenizing forces of suburban life. By the end of Part 1, the tone is unmistakably irreverent. Reggie's defiant humor sets the stage for the narrative to unfold in a series of escalating pranks and rebellious acts against the oppressive aesthetics and rules of the HOA. His introduction is not merely a recounting of events, it is a deliberate, tongue-in-cheek challenge to the absurd rigidity of suburban perfection. In doing so, he invites the reader to join him on a journey that promises both conflict and comedy, a battle waged with wit, wildflowers, and, eventually, a touch of poetic justice, all aimed at toppling the meticulously maintained order of Willow Creek Estates. I live on Elderwood Lane in a modest, perfectly respectable bungalow, an unpretentious haven tucked away on a quiet street where retirees spend their days tending to immaculate rose bushes and grumbling about skateboard-riding teenagers passing by. For me, Elderwood Lane is more than just an address, it's a statement of authenticity. My home is simple, yet it is filled with character. I cherish every dent and scratch that tells a story of independence, and nothing could be further from the sterile perfection of the Willow Creek Estates. In stark contrast, Willow Creek Estates lies just beyond the line, a bastion of homogeneity built on an obsession with aesthetics. There, a row of beige McMansions stands like identical monuments, each boasting a gleaming three-car garage and a lawn manicured with almost military precision. Every blade of grass seems to be measured, and every live, laugh, love sign might as well be inscribed in Latin for all its pretension. This neighborhood is dedicated to a collective image of opulence and order, a place where even the smallest deviation from the script is met with severe disapproval. The heart of my home, however, is my garage. It is nothing short of a sanctuary. A chaotic, grease-smeared atelier where my vintage Triumph motorcycle rests proudly alongside a collection of dusty power tools and spare parts assembled over years of tinkering. To me, this garage represents freedom, a personal space where I can escape the absurdities of a world dictated by rigid societal norms. Every creak of the well-worn door, every oil stain on the concrete floor, is a testament to an unfiltered life, free from the suffocating strictness that defines the affluent realms of Willow Creek. Even as I appreciate the understated beauty of my surroundings, I cannot ignore the creeping influence of uniformity that seems to be encroaching on our community. It is this clash of aesthetics, the raw, lived-in character of my humble abode versus the sanitized perfection of Willow Creek Estates, that sets the stage for the inevitable conflict. I am fully aware that my unorthodox approach to home improvement and vehicle storage might be considered an eyesore by those with a predisposition for immaculate order. Yet, every time I step into my garage, I feel a surge of pride for preserving a piece of authenticity that the world so desperately needs. Late one sweltering Tuesday afternoon, while I was engaged in the delicate art of adjusting the carburetor on my prized Triumph, the unmistakable hum of disapproval disrupted my routine. I had just wiped the grease from my hands and was humming along to an old blues tune when I noticed an unfamiliar car pull into my driveway. My heart sank, not because of the interruption, but because I knew trouble was on the horizon. Within moments, I would come face to face with the very embodiment of community overreach, Brenda Higginbotham, the imposing president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. The contrast between my world and hers had never been starker. In my relaxed, lived-in space, every dent and scratch in my garage was celebrated as part of life's character. In hers, perfection was an absolute mandate. As I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation, I couldn't help but wonder if my unpretentious home would soon serve as the battleground for a war of wills between free expression and oppressive conformity. Little did I know, that fateful encounter was only the first act in a series of rebellious defiance. The afternoon sun beat down upon me as I prepared for what was coming, the reality of the situation melding with my own determined sense of pride. In that small haven of oil and machinery, I stood ready to defend not only my personal liberty, but also the chaotic beauty that defined my way of living, a beauty that the pristine lawns and overbearing edicts of Willow Creek Estates could never hope to replicate. Almost as soon as I resumed work on my treasured motorcycle's carburetor, a presence invaded the serenity of my driveway. I glanced up to see Brenda Higginbotham, looking every bit the personification of HOA excess. However, today her demeanor had a subtle twist. Her usual polished condescension was now mixed with an almost amused disdain as she squeezed into her charcoal-colored, battleship gray SUV. "Excuse me." Brenda's voice rang out, sharp and cutting through the afternoon heat. "I am Brenda Higginbotham, president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, and I must say, your garage door is an absolute disgrace." I stood there, a bit taken aback by her sudden intrusion. "Reggie Dubosi," I replied with a measured calm, "I do admit I tend to leave the garage door open from time to time. It gets stuffy in there." I couldn't help but flash a wry smile as I glanced at my cluttered refuge. A space that housed my beloved Triumph, my collection of reliable power tools, and enough spare parts to spark conversations about passion for mechanics. Brenda's eyes narrowed, and her tone shifted to one of indignation. "It is not just about ventilation, Mr. Dubosi. Your open garage is a visual affront, a violation of the aesthetic harmony that Willow Creek Estate strives to maintain. Your property, although technically on Elderwood Lane, is adjacent to our community and is detracting from the overall property values here." Her words, delivered with the precise rigidity of someone who lived and breathed the rules of conformity, struck a nerve. "Ma'am, my garage is a work of art, a chaotic, greasy masterpiece. It reflects character, not blight," I countered, my voice light with irony. "After all, it is my personal sanctuary, a haven for my motorcycle and the tools of my trade." Brenda, ever the purveyor of order, was unyielding. "Your sanctuary is a nuisance, Mr. Dubosi. I am currently having my driveway repaved and in a moment of necessity have decided that your garage would be the ideal temporary parking space for my vehicle. It is in the best interest of the community, and I demand that you comply." That suggestion was the final straw. My eyes widened in disbelief as I stared at her, my tone darkening. "You're telling me that you, the queen of conformity, the high priestess of the HOA, wished to commandeer my garage. The very garage that houses my beloved motorcycle and those incredibly dangerous power tools. Not on my street, not in my universe. Her face flushed a brilliant shade of purple, a color that perfectly mirrored her sense of indignation. "It is only temporary," she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that seemed designed to unsettle even the most stoic observer. "This is for the good of the community." I couldn't help but laugh, a deep, hearty laugh born not of amusement, but of exasperation at the absurdity of it all. "For the good of the community?" I repeated incredulously. "The only thing my garage is good for is as a testament to individuality and freedom. Not as a parking space for your monstrous SUV." Her words became a mix of threats and promises of retribution, a litany of warnings about the power of the HOA and her so-called connections within the community. Standing there in my driveway, amidst the familiar scent of motor oil and old machinery, I felt as though I were in the midst of a surreal courtroom drama, where the simple act of leaving a garage door open was being interpreted as a cardinal sin. Brenda's tirade echoed off the nearby hedges and well-trimmed lawns as she hurled an ultimatum. "I warn you, Mr. Dubosi, I will not tolerate this disrespect. I have friends and influence, and you will regret crossing the line." Her threats hung in the air, heavy with the promise of bureaucratic retribution. At that moment, time seemed to slow down. The air thick with tension, the shrill sound of her voice mingling with the distant hum of suburban life. I could see a future of endless paperwork and petty disputes unfolding before me, all born out of a simple disagreement over a garage door. Yet, even as I acknowledged the gravity of the situation, a rebellious spark lit within me, a determination to stand my ground, to defend the little sanctuary that symbolized my way of living in defiance of an oppressive, uniform ideal. With Brenda's final words echoing in my ears, I knew that nothing would be the same after this encounter. The battle lines had been drawn, not just between me and the HOA, but between a spirit of creative chaos and the unforgiving hand of conformity. The morning after our heated confrontation brought with it an unexpected surprise. I awoke to find, pinned directly to my front door, a bright pink notice from the Willow Creek Estates HOA. Its bold color and official language instantly caught my eye, as did the absurdity of its claims. The notice accused me, Reginald Dubosi, of violating several arcane bylaws, specifically citing Section 4, Paragraph 17, Subsection C, that ostensibly prohibited activities detrimental to the aesthetic harmony of the community. It went on to claim that my open garage constituted the operation of a non-compliant automotive repair facility and a visual nuisance. Threats of legal action loomed large, and it was all signed by none other than Brenda Higginbotham, the self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood perfection. I stood there, the notice in my hand, and laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. This woman was serious, so serious that she believed every word of her own self-made decree. Taking her bluff as an opportunity for a taste of poetic justice, I dialed the number printed on the notice. Fully expecting to hear Brenda's shrill voice, I instead encountered a monotonous, robotic message: "You have reached the Willow Creek Estates HOA. Please leave a message after the beep." I cleared my throat and said, "Hi, this is Reginald Dubosi, the guy with the supposedly offensive garage. I received your notice, and I just wanted to say you can stick it where the sun don't shine." Without waiting for a response, I hung up, stifling a grin. I thought that would be the end of it, an absurd chapter closed with a dismissive phone call. Yet, I was soon proven wrong. Within hours, as I tinkered with yet another spare part in my garage, I heard the distant wail of sirens. A police car pulled up to my property, and 2 officers emerged. They approached me with cautious expressions, one asking, "Mr. Dubosi, we've received a complaint from Miss Brenda Higginbotham of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. She alleges that you are operating an illegal business on your property and disturbing the peace." I nearly burst out laughing. "An illegal business disturbing the peace?" I said, shaking my head. "All I'm doing is tinkering with my motorcycle." Yet, they insisted that I lower the volume of my work and keep my garage door closed, admonishing me with a warning that reeked of bureaucratic rigidity. I nodded in agreement, though inside I was stewing with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. That notice, that ridiculous complaint, and the ensuing police visit marked a turning point, a threshold where the oppressive absurdity of the HOA began to feel all too real. The chill of conformity and the iron hand of bureaucracy were no longer distant specters, they were here, knocking on my door and prying into the sanctity of my humble garage. As I resumed my work that day, every clang of metal and every burst of engine noise felt like an act of rebellion. The encounter left me with an unshakable resolve. I was not going to let the rigid dictates of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, and by extension, Brenda Higginbotham, strip away the freedom to live and work on my own terms. That crisp pink notice served as both a badge of absurdity and a clarion call to action, a signal that the war for personal freedom had officially begun. I placed the notice on my workbench, examining its formal language with a wry sense of humor. It was a document born of unchecked entitlement, a manifesto of mediocrity designed to enforce a sameness that I could never, in good conscience, abide by. I resolved then that my humble garage, my cherished sanctuary, would remain a bastion of individuality, even if it meant clashing with the overly meticulous and suffocating world of Willow Creek Estates. In that moment, as I tightened a bolt on my Triumph's carburetor, I knew that the battle ahead would be long and filled with pranks, bold gestures, and unwavering defiance. I would fight for every smudge of grease, every dent in the garage door, because they symbolized the very essence of my individuality. And so, with a newfound determination and a twinkle of mischief in my eye, I prepared for the coming days, a time when rebellion would be measured not by the grandeur of its actions, but by the power of a single refusal to conform. No sooner had I shrugged off the absurdity of the notice than the next events unfolded in rapid, almost cinematic fashion. I was back in my garage, absorbed in my work, when I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens. The police had been called yet again. This time, the complaint had escalated to include allegations of operating an illegal business and disturbing the peace on my property. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived. Their faces bore the weariness of routine stops, yet their eyes flickered with a hint of skepticism as they took in the scene. "Mr. Dubosi," one of the officers said, his tone neutral yet firm, "Miss Brenda Higginbotham claims that you are running a chop shop and causing a ruckus with your garage activities." I couldn't help but let a smile tug at the corners of my mouth as I replied, "All I'm doing is tinkering with my motorcycle, it's hardly a criminal enterprise." Though my words were light-hearted, the tension in the air was palpable. The officers conferred briefly, then one of them said, "We don't want any trouble, Mr. Dubosi. Just try to keep the noise down and ensure your garage door stays closed." I nodded in mock compliance as they turned to leave, yet inside, I felt a growing fire. The very fact that Brenda Higginbotham had resorted to summoning the authorities over my humble garage was both infuriating and, dare I say, comical. That day marked a turning point, a moment when the absurdity of the entire situation crystallized into a clear choice. To endure or to rise up against the stifling conformity enforced by the Willow Creek Estates HOA. As the officers drove away, I couldn't help but chuckle at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. I had become the unwilling poster child for a battle between individuality and imposed aesthetics. That evening, I sat in my garage surrounded by the comforting clutter of automotive parts and tools. The encounter replayed in my mind, each word from Brenda's complaint like a spark waiting to ignite a wildfire of rebellion. I began to plan, not just a response, but a statement. If the HOA wanted compliance, then I'd give them something to talk about. I'd transform my humble abode into a canvas for rebellion. Ideas bubbled up, mischievous pranks that would turn the perfect, monotonous lawns of Willow Creek Estates into a riot of color and hilarity. I envisioned a defiant display, a statement about freedom and individuality. At that moment, the sound of my work tools became less a call to repair and more an overture to revolt. Every bolt and every gear became part of a larger plan to topple the sterile monotony that Brenda Higginbotham so desperately clung to. I began drafting a list of small but potent gestures, installing cheeky decorations, blasting my favorite rock tunes late into the night, even tweaking the garden display around my house. With each idea, the frustration of the past few days transformed into creative energy. I decided that my protest would be as ingenious as it was nonconformist, a measured yet unmistakable jab at the stranglehold that the HOA had over the neighborhood's aesthetics. That night, with the evidence of today's police visit still echoing in my ears, I resolved that tomorrow would be the first day of my open rebellion. I would start small, perhaps with a whimsical sign or a bold decorative touch, and gradually work my way to a full-blown statement. After all, if the system demanded conformity, then the best response might be to celebrate the chaos of individuality even more fiercely. The sirens, the notice, and the absurdity of it all had only hardened my resolve. As I closed the garage door that night, I felt an unmistakable thrill. This was not merely a defense of my privacy but a declaration of independence against the oppressive uniformity of Willow Creek Estates. I smiled to myself, ready to embrace the coming days with a mix of humor, rebellion, and the unyielding determination to remain true to who I was. In the days that followed, the air around my bungalow seemed charged with anticipation. The sting of that bizarre police visit and the resentful tone of Brenda Higginbotham's notice had set something in motion. I realized that if I were to truly stand up against the rigid dictates of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, I would have to take my rebellion to a whole new level. My first act of defiance was spontaneous and bold. I headed to the local party store and purchased a giant inflatable flamingo, an outrageously bright, garishly pink specimen that instantly contrasted with the orderly, muted tones of the neighboring lawns. Carefully, I hoisted it into position right next to the property line that separated my humble home from the meticulously maintained lawns of Willow Creek Estates. The flamingo, bobbing cheerfully in the breeze, was an unmistakable challenge to anyone who insisted on the sanctity of bland conformity. The next day, as I returned from my morning coffee run, I noticed that my neighbors had begun to take notice. Some muttered disapprovingly, while others couldn't help but smile at the absurdity. But I wasn't content with a single symbol. Fueled by righteous indignation and a newfound creative spirit, I decided to escalate my protest. I scoured local thrift stores and garden centers until I found a collection of garden gnomes. But these were not the cute, cheery sort you'd expect. They were grotesque, off-kilter, and downright bizarre, with beady eyes and twisted expressions. I arranged them in a deliberate line facing directly toward Willow Creek Estates, as if they were a squadron of mischievous guardians flanking my front yard. To further punctuate my message, I began playing loud, pulsating music from a portable speaker set up discreetly near my entrance. The thumping beats disrupted the usual serene early morning silence and forced the residents of Willow Creek Estates to take notice of the vibrant chaos emanating from my property. Every time the music blared, I imagined Brenda Higginbotham's perfectly prim visage contorting with anger. As the days passed, my acts of defiance continued to mount. I experimented with subtle alterations, the sudden addition of stray, colorful details to the edges of my yard, unexpected splashes of paint on my front door, and even whimsical, hand-painted signs that cheekily questioned the notion of aesthetic harmony. It wasn't long before these deliberate disruptions evolved into a carefully orchestrated rebellion against uniformity and mediocrity. At night, when the neighborhood slept, I'd plan my next move with the precision of a master strategist. Each act of defiance was a small victory against a system designed to erase individuality. I found myself filled with a heady mixture of adrenaline and creative satisfaction. The thrill of standing up for personal freedom was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The response from the community was mixed. While some neighbors grumbled in disapproval, others began to applaud the bright colors and bold statements that now punctuated an otherwise monotonous suburb. Whispers spread about the mysterious, rebellious figure on Elderwood Lane who dared to challenge the stern dictates of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. In a twist of fate, my small acts of insubordination started to inspire others, igniting a subtle yet unmistakable shift in the neighborhood's collective mood. Brenda Higginbotham, of course, was not amused. I would occasionally catch glimpses of her pacing in her immaculate front yard, her face etched with fury as she watched the changes unfold right before her eyes. Yet, while her indignation was palpable, she seemed increasingly outnumbered by the growing sense of liberation among the residents, those who had longed for a spark of authenticity in a sea of sameness. By the end of the week, I knew that the first salvo of my rebellion had been fired. Though I remained discreet, every note of the pulsing music, every inflated flamingo, and every offbeat garden gnome served as a rallying cry, a bold, unapologetic celebration of individuality over the sterile uniformity championed by the Willow Creek Estates HOA. I realized that this wasn't just about my garage or even my modest home, it was about challenging an entire system that stifled creativity and self-expression. With each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I was no longer just Reginald Dubosi, a man tinkering with his motorcycle. I was a beacon of resistance, a living testament to the belief that even in a world ruled by rules and rigid aesthetics, one person's stubborn spirit could sow the seeds of change. As my rebellion continued to gain momentum, I knew it was time to take things one step further. The light-hearted pranks and subtle adjustments were fun, but I wanted to etch my defiance into the very fabric of the neighborhood psyche. I began to orchestrate a series of carefully planned mischiefs that would not only unsettle Brenda Higginbotham but also serve as a rallying point for others disillusioned by the rigid conformity of Willow Creek Estates. Late one evening, I hatched my most audacious plan yet. Remembering Brenda's notorious obsession with her pristine lawn, her crowning glory, I decided to transform it into a living canvas that defied her carefully cultivated order. I ventured into the local garden store, selecting a mixed bag of wildflower seeds in every conceivable hue. Under the cover of darkness, I crept silently across the property line and scattered the seeds with abandon, letting nature take its unpredictable course. In the days that followed, the results were nothing short of spectacular. Overnight, Brenda's meticulously manicured green expanse erupted into a riot of wild colors. Vivid blossoms and untamed greenery burst through the uniform turf, creating a chaotic, breathtakingly beautiful mosaic that starkly contrasted the otherwise bland surroundings. I watched with a sense of triumph as neighbors began capturing pictures of the transformation, their smartphones clicking in admiration of nature's unscripted brilliance. But I wasn't finished yet. Embracing the audacity of my newfound role as a rebel, I turned my attention to Brenda's prized vehicle. One fateful morning, as she prepared for one of her routine HOA meetings, I stealthily replaced all of her vehicle's hubcaps with bright pink flamingo ornaments. When Brenda's gray SUV emerged from her driveway the next day, it was unrecognizable, a rolling testament to the absurdity of her dictatorial reign. The sight of those ludicrous ornaments sent ripples of laughter through the neighborhood, and even some of her staunchest supporters couldn't help but smirk. In between these theatrical acts of defiance, I continued to maintain my everyday routine, tinkering with my motorcycle and enjoying my simple pleasures. Every time I stepped into my garage, the very heart of my independence, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I had transformed my personal sanctuary into an emblem of rebellion against oppressive uniformity. Word of my misadventures traveled fast. What began as isolated acts of protest soon became a symbol of a broader resistance movement within our community. Neighbors who had long suffered under the suffocating demands of the HOA began to embrace small acts of individuality. Some even planted their own wildflower patches, quietly challenging the uncompromising rules that had governed their lives for so long. Despite all this, Brenda's fury intensified. I would occasionally glimpse her from afar, pacing her immaculate lawn or scowling at passing residents who dared to smile at the transformed landscape. Her attempts to regain control, through stern notices, heated phone calls, and even personal visits, only fanned the flames of my defiance. In countless exchanges, her voice rang out with the shrill timbre of entitlement, while my measured retorts grew bolder with each passing day. As the weeks wore on, the rebellion reached an almost surreal climax. It wasn't simply about my garage or her lawn anymore, it was a full-scale uprising against every rigid rule imposed by the Willow Creek Estates HOA. With each prank, every small act of mischief, I felt a surge of exhilaration, a belief that even one man's stubborn refusal to bow to conformity could spark a revolution. The whimsical vandalism of Brenda's hubcaps, the riot of colors in her once pristine lawn, and the covert displays of irreverence had all combined to form a narrative of liberation. In that charged atmosphere of irreverence and shared rebellion, I found that my actions not only brought laughter and hope to the neighborhood, but they also sent an unmistakable message to the powers that be. It was a declaration: creativity, individual freedom, and a bit of spontaneous joy would always defy the confines of oppressive uniformity. In the weeks following the ultimate rebellion, the atmosphere in our community began to change in remarkable ways. The relentless antics, the riotous wildflowers, and even the absurd pink flamingos had created a ripple effect that transformed the rigid culture of Willow Creek Estates. One crisp morning, I received a formal letter of apology from the Willow Creek Estates HOA. It appeared that many residents, tired of endless dictates and sterile uniformity, had staged a quiet coup. Brenda Higginbotham, once the unchallenged president of the HOA, was removed from power, and the new board proposed a radical rewrite of the bylaws. One that embraced a bit of individuality and warmth. The letter even extended a lifetime honorary membership to me, a symbolic gesture acknowledging my role in spurring change. I politely declined the offer, preferring the anonymity of a free spirit over official recognition. I also heard rumors that Brenda had moved to a gated community in Florida, where she now spent her days meticulously pruning hibiscus bushes and complaining about unruly squirrels, a small irony that never failed to bring a smirk to my face. As for me, I returned to my garage, a sanctuary filled with cherished relics of my old life, now imbued with the triumph of creative rebellion. The pulsating strains of my favorite music still drifted from a portable speaker on some afternoons, and the wildflowers scattered on Brenda's former lawn continued to flourish, a living symbol of change and defiance. Neighbors, once resigned to a dull, monotonous way of life, began to embrace subtle acts of self-expression in their own yards. This transformation wasn't just cosmetic, it was emblematic of a deeper awakening, a realization that life's beauty was not found in uniformity but in the celebration of individuality. The rebellion sparked by one man's refusal to conform had evolved into a quiet revolution, proving that even the most meticulously orchestrated systems could be unsettled by a spark of creative resistance. Now, every time I glance at the giant inflatable flamingo that proudly stands at my front yard, or the remains of a mischievous prank that once ruffled the feathers of old order, I am reminded of the power of defiance in the face of oppression. My story, a blend of humor, stubbornness, and unapologetic nonconformity, has become a small legend in our community. And as I continue to tinker in my garage, the pulse of rebellion still beating in the background, I know that the spirit of individuality will always find a way to flourish, even in the strictest of environments. In this new dawn, where wildflowers outnumber perfectly trimmed hedges and laughter drowns out authoritarian rules, I can truly say that a little chaos and a lot of heart can change the world, one rebellious act at a time.